about the forms that we're required to fill out for our listing presentations. So we're just going to be looking at the listing forms today. We're going to start with the agency disclosure. So this is the New York State agency disclosure form. It's required for our listing documents. And we're going to be filling it out for a seller. So as I said, this is a listing, so we're going to pretend we have a seller. So the first thing that we need to do, well, the first thing you should really do is you should read this form. You should be familiar with all the forms that you're using. So if you're not, an agency is so important. I cannot stress enough how important agency is because it's our whole business. It's everything we do. Our relationships with our sellers, our buyers is all about agency. So you need to understand the difference between dual agency, dual with designated, seller's agency, and it's explained in the disclosure. And it's something that you need to be having a conversation with your seller about, so you should understand it, okay? I get forms filled out with all the boxes checked, none of the boxes checked, so it's really important that we figure out how to fill this out properly. So for this purpose, we're going to fill it out as if we're representing the seller. So the first thing we need to do is print the name of the licensee in the box. That's you. So you come here, click, and type your name in the box.
Just a second.
Yeah?
I'm gonna add it, I'm gonna go first in a plus, right? Are you gonna come to the...
If you have the form open, it should be live. This box is live, so we have these forms set up so that you're able to just click on them. So you should be able to just click on it and put your name in it.
Okay.
Okay?
Start my transactions. And then I have a loops here.
Yeah, you need to have the agency disclosure open, okay? So you should have your loop, you should have your templates,
I have it.
and your forms pulled down into your loop. Okay, so we're live right now, so if you have questions that you need me to actually help you on your computer, I'll do that afterward, okay?
Okay.
All right, so but see, in the meantime, see if you can get that open, pull one in, click on the box and put your name in. So here's why this is important, because what if you fill out this agency disclosure and you don't put your name on it, and then there's a dispute or a question. Another agent comes in, they represent, say you have a buyer, they represent, and then there's a dispute over the commission, or there's a question of whether, how you represented your buyer, and then your client pulls out this form and you don't have your name on it, and the other agent is claiming that they had them sign the form. It's just simple to print your name in there, and it's really important so that everybody knows that you are the agent that had the conversation with your seller, okay?
Yes.
Then you're going to come down here and you're going to check this box that you're representing the seller, okay? So it says, this form is provided to me by Lori Burns. This is my company, a licensed real estate broker acting in the interest of the seller, okay? So you're going to go ahead and click the box showing that you're representing the seller. Now it says, if you see, it says check relationship below. These boxes here on this part of the form, so imaginary line here, this is the top part of the form. You have to pick one of those, okay? You can't be all of those. You can't represent the seller, the buyer, the seller's agent, the broker's agent, a dual agency. I get forms. I absolutely get forms that are checked, that come in and have each and every one of these boxes. This one's not cooperating. Each and every one of these boxes checked, okay? So they'll come, they'll check that they're a dual agent. I don't think my box is big enough. A dual with designated, they'll check that they're a seller's agent. You cannot be a seller's agent and a dual agent at the same time, okay?
Dual agent, we said, if it's somebody with me who's from the Keller Williams.
Right,
Case is
right.
dual.
So on the top part of this form, you have to pick something. You cannot be everything to everyone, all right? So in this case, if you're sitting down with your seller at a listing appointment, do you know if you're going to be a dual agent at that point in time?
I have to ask him, do you sell the house with somebody else?
You have to ask him if it's okay for you to be a dual agent further down when you get an offer on the property, right? So for right now, on your listing appointment, you are strictly a seller's agent, okay?
Yes.
You are not a dual agent, and you are not a dual with designated if you're sitting on a listing appointment. This portion of the form is advance informed consent. So now you have the conversation, you say to your seller, look, I don't know if I'm going to sell your house. I'm going to do everything I can. I may bring a buyer and be in a position to represent a buyer and you at the same time, which is called dual agency. In addition, there may be an agent from my office who brings a buyer, which puts us in a dual agency situation with a designated sales agent. You have the conversation. Is it okay? This is, okay with your seller that you're representing both, you give up some of your fiduciary responsibilities, et cetera. This is not an agency class, so I'm not talking, we're not going to go into detail on that. But the point being, the seller consents to advanced informed consent, to dual, and dual with designated. So you want to check both these boxes. And in our listing, this is the blank form, but in our listing folder, this form is already filled out this way, okay? So if for some reason your seller says, no, I don't want dual or dual with designated, that's a different conversation. You uncheck those boxes. Understand that if you don't have advanced informed consent to dual or dual with designated, you yourself cannot show your own listing, and no one in either of the KW offices, Rockland or Orange County, can show that listing because that comes under the umbrella of dual agency. So it's really important that your sellers understand if they want you to be able to sell, to market your listings to the agents in our office and allow them to bring buyers or allow you to bring a buyer, that they have to consent to dual agency. Very important for your sellers to understand that. So what I'm saying is, as a seller's agent, we don't do broker agency in the office. We should never see this checked, but you should not check this box and either of these boxes at the same time. It means you're acting, if you do, that says you're acting as a seller's agent and a dual agent at the same time, and you can't be that. You are one or the other, okay? Today you're a seller's agent. A couple months from now you get an offer, you may be a dual agent or you may be a designated agent at that point, okay?
Lori,
Yes.
that right there, stop it. This is two choices, dual agency or dual with the designated.
Yes.
With designated is if it's happened to be somebody from KW,
Yes,
right?
we're going to talk about that right now. So
Okay.
the difference between dual and dual with designated in our office, the way that is defined, dual agency is if you sell your own listing, or if you're on a team and you're selling your lead listing agent's listing, you are a dual agent, okay? Dual with designated is if you are selling someone else's listing in the office. Okay, so your seller has to agree to this so that another agent in our office could bring you an offer, which is dual with designated. And what you're going to do, and what I like, and some people are doing this, and I think it's the way to go, is if you read here, they talk about dual with designated. If it's indicated above, blank is appointed to represent the buyer and blank to represent the seller. So in this case, this is my listing, so I'm going to put my name in here. I obviously would be the one representing the seller if it was a dual agent with designated sales situation. In this blank, you can simply put TBD, to be determined, okay? Because you don't know who that's going to be, but that's perfectly acceptable. And then if someone in the office brings an offer, then you have them, they are designated to represent the buyer. And guys, you do not need to go back and redo the agency disclosure. It's advanced consent. You do not need to go back and fill in any of these blanks once you've filled it out already. It's consent to dual agency. It's to be determined who's representing the buyer once you get the offer. You don't need to change this form.
What's mean TBD?
To be determined.
To be determined.
To be determined, okay? And then the last piece of information you really want to put in here, and this is important because oftentimes we can't read the signatures and you don't want someone to come and say they didn't sign the form. So you just want to put, John Seller in here. Type their name into this box. And then you have them, you check here, are they a buyer or a seller? Because remember, we use this form for everyone. You check that they're a seller, and then you assign and have them sign and date on the bottom. Okay, and that's it for listing. That's agency relationship and how this form should properly be filled out. okay? And we'll talk about buyer agency when we do the buyer docs, but it's the same thing. You're representing a
Yes.
buyer. You cannot be a buyer's agent, a dual agent, and a dual with designated. If I'm seeing these boxes checked, it says buyer, buyer's agent, dual agent, guess what? I know you didn't bother to fill out this form until you already had your buyer. But typically, this form should be presented at first substantive contact when you're having your buyer consultation and you're sitting down. You don't know what home the buyer's going to buy, and you may show them your listings, you may show them other agents' listings, you may show them in-house listings. So again, you could be any and all of these, but you're not these at the same time. So unless you're sitting with a buyer and you're only going to show your own listing, that would be the only time you would have this checked. And then it would be this case, it would be buyer, dual agent, not buyer's agent. You would be only a dual agent. These two boxes should never be checked at the same time. Okay?
One or other one. This one or that one.
One or the other, correct. Okay? All right. Good?
Good.
All right. Let's talk about the other more complex document that we deal with is a lead paint disclosure. Okay? So,
Just give me a second.
yeah, if you have you're following along, go ahead and pull it up and we'll take a look at it. So the thing about lead paint disclosure, again, is you need to read it. Just simply read it. It's self-explanatory. If you read it, it tells you how to fill it out. So one of the biggest mistakes that agents make is this first box here, okay? This addendum made part of a sales agreement dated, so there's obviously some controversy in New York because we don't do our contracts. This is an addendum to a sales agreement. So when should this form be dated? And I've asked a few people, and I've called the hotline. I talked to the HGAR attorney. I talked to Rosemary about this, and we're all in agreement that the logical time that you should be dating the lead paint agreement is when you have your accepted purchase offer. The date of your accepted purchase offer is when we get our meeting of the minds.
When
So
somebody
that
wants
is
to buy it.
when you have a buyer, and now we're talking about this from a listing agent perspective, so this should be blank when you're filling it out. You're sitting down with your seller at the listing appointment, you are not filling in this date, okay? This gets filled in when you have an accepted purchase offer. So the process, and this is really important, guys, because what I get is I'm checking loops, they're under contract, there's no lead paint. You've missed your opportunity to represent your buyer or seller or it's really the buyer in this case because they're the one that have the 10-day window of opportunity. But if you've not presented this lead paint disclosure to that buyer within that period of time and they've signed contracts, it's too late. This has to be signed, and the legal hotline will tell you this has to be signed prior to the last signature on those official contracts. If you have not had this signed by the time the contracts are signed, you really have not done your obligation, your fiduciary responsibility to represent your client. Super important. So, listing agents, what you should be doing is leaving that blank until you get your accepted offer. You send that over to the buyer's agent with the accepted offer docs and say, hey, here's my lead paint disclosure. Please have it filled out and sent back to me by the time you have the home inspection. At the home inspection is a great time for a buyer's agent to be going over this with their buyer. So that's when this date gets filled in, okay? At the listing appointment, by all means, you should be filling in the property address. So it's 123 Main Street in Middletown. By all means, you should be putting the seller's name in there. We got John Seller. Your name, the agent, goes here. Okay, this is not the buyer's agent. This is the listing agent. And then obviously the purchaser you're going to leave blank because you don't know who the purchaser is yet. So that part of the form gets left blank. So you have no date here until you have an accepted offer, and obviously you don't know who your purchaser is. You need to put the property address, the name of your seller, and your name on the form. Okay? Then it gives you this tells what the obligation is for the seller to disclose any knowledge of lead paint. Read it if you haven't. Okay. the seller's disclosure, all right? So if you're on a listing appointment, this is the part that the seller fills out. Read this, guys. Again, I get this wrong all the time with blanks, where the sellers are acknowledging in the purchaser's acknowledgement area. The seller's disclosure is parts A and B. And here's the thing about that. You have to fill out parts A and B, okay? So one is about known lead-based paint hazards and whether or not you have them. And if you read here, it says check 1 or 2 below. One of these boxes should be checked, either that there is knowledge of or there is no knowledge of, okay? Typically, that's this box, and we have that filled out in the listing docs. That's pre-filled in for you. So you can always unclick that radio button. If for some reason there is lead-based paint, then they're providing documents, based on what the situation is. So you have to fill out part A, presence of lead-based paint, and then part B, records and reports. So 1 is knowledge of, and 2 is records or reports about, okay? So either the seller has provided the records and reports they have, or they have no reports, and this is typically, again, what we find, no reports. But you need to fill out both. Presence of lead paint, check 1 or 2 below. Reports and records of red paint, check 1 or 2 below. So please, A and B. Okay? This part, guys, is for the purchaser. You leave this blank. Your seller should not be initialing this part of the document. And I'm actually going to take these out of the templates. From a listing perspective, we don't need them. We're never filling them out. If you have your purchaser, then you can add them back in once you provide this lead paint form for them. But from a listing perspective, we don't need it. This whole area is for the purchaser to acknowledge, okay? So we're going to go ahead and move on. Agents acknowledge.